Bien, interviene a continuación Marjorie Hunt. Marjorie trabaja en el Smithsonian en Estados Unidos y es quien lleva un programa de investigación y de difusión de los oficios tradicionales de construcción en su país y viene a hablarnos de este trabajo. Gracias.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Alejandro, and all of the organizers of this conference. It's been an honor to take part in this important seminar, and so inspiring to hear about the masterful craftsmanship and exquisite work in wood and stone this morning. Indeed, all of the seminar presentations have been incredibly inspiring and energizing to me. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you this morning about the ethnographic research, community engagement, and public outreach with traditional building artisans that I've been working on for a number of years as a folklorist, curator, and filmmaker with the Smithsonian Institution's Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage in Washington, D.C. The title of my talk is Precious Work: Sustaining Traditional Building Crafts and Cultural Heritage in the United States. The phrase, precious work, is taken from the words of a fifth-generation master plasterer from New Orleans, Louisiana, Earl Bartay, who in describing his craft to me said, "It's some precious work. It's like a diamond, like a jewel, and it's up to me to preserve it." Mr. Bartay, who passed away several years ago, worked tirelessly to keep his craft alive. Here he is with his grandson, Jamie, who he's been teaching in the context of his 150-year-old family plastering business. He tried very hard to get apprenticeship programs up and running again in New Orleans, to get young people interested in going into the trade. That was his dream. His family had been plastering in New Orleans since 1850s, when his great-great-grandfather, a plasterer from Nice, France, immigrated to the United States by way of Haiti, bringing with him his plastering skills. Earlier generations in his family helped to craft many of New Orleans' signature buildings, such as the St. Louis Cathedral and the French Market. Later generations, like Mr. Bartay, his brothers, cousins, sons, and even his daughters, worked to restore this unique architectural heritage. He said to me, "I look at these old buildings and I know one of my ancestors was involved in building it. Now we're working on restoring it, and it gives me such a strong feeling for how things continue." Sadly, Mr. Bartay saw the demand for his trade decrease dramatically since the time he was a boy working with his father. The introduction of drywall had a devastating effect on the plastering trade, which is now one of the most threatened of the traditional crafts in the United States. This is indeed precious work. Master artisans in the building crafts are carriers of a vast and invaluable store of traditional knowledge and skill, of intangible cultural heritage that has been accumulated across generations, indeed centuries. This knowledge is critical not only for preserving and sustaining historic buildings, places that hold important memories, meaning, and experiences that connect us to our history, our identity, and our cultural heritage, but for the creation of new structures of beauty and excellence that will inspire and enrich us all. Unfortunately, the reality is that for many years, these traditional building skills have been in decline in the United States, and in some cases are endangered. The last half of the 20th century saw tremendous changes in technology, society, architecture, and the economy that have put traditional building craftsmanship and methods of training in jeopardy. Many of the artisans I work with have expressed concern for the survival of their crafts. They do not see many young people coming up in the trades. They do not see enough demand for their work. They do not see many opportunities for training. They worry that they will not be able to transmit their skills to a new generation of artisans who will carry them forward into the future. This crisis of craft has existed for a long time in America. A report written in 1967 for the National Trust for Historic Preservation states that, quote, "The survival of these crafts will require most thoughtful solutions to human as well as economic problems, solutions based on a national realization of the importance of these skills to our continuing culture." More than 50 years later, many of these same problems still persist. Although in recent years, there has been a perceptible shift and sort of an increase in the recognition of the value and relevance of traditional building crafts. So there's reason for hope. I've witnessed this firsthand. When I first began my ethnographic research, way back in 1978, with Italian-American stone carvers who had worked for decades to craft architectural ornament and sculptures for Washington National Cathedral. This is the 14th century Gothic-style church being built in Washington, D.C. It was begun in 1907 and was completed in 1990. I learned then that most of the big limestone quarries in Indiana were closed, the stone cutting mills were shuttered, and all of the carvers at the cathedral had been laid off except for one lone carver, Vincent Palumbo, who was only working half-time when there had once been a thriving workshop, a community of craftsmen. Modernism had taken its toll. Natural materials like Indiana limestone were rarely being used in new construction, and the historic preservation movement was only just taking off. There was very little demand for the craftsperson's skill. Over the 40 years that have passed since then, I've seen substantial changes. An increased awareness of the need for skilled trades, the implementation of new training programs, and a resurgence of interest in traditional architectural styles are all starting to make a difference. Still, as Trevor Marchand, Emeritus Professor of Anthropology at the University of London, points out, the place of craft work in today's society and economy is riddled with obstacles. One obstacle is the market. It is difficult to find clients in today's deadline and bottom line driven world who are willing to commit resources to quality craftsmanship, to exquisite joinery, fine masonry, to excellent natural materials, and to the time needed to accomplish good work. In fact, it is the historic preservation movement, which started gathering momentum in the mid-1970s in the United States, that is responsible for saving many of these crafts from dying out in my country. Traditional building skills were needed to preserve and sustain old buildings, and thus master craftspeople found that there was new demand for their work. But still, it is not enough. We need to work to increase existing demand and encourage more clients to be committed to incorporating traditional design and excellent craftsmanship in their architectural projects, whether it's new construction or restoration and reconstruction projects. A second obstacle is the need for more opportunities for training. It used to be that master craftsmen and journeymen taught apprentices their skills through a rigorous system of hands-on experiential training taught to young apprentices in craft workshops or on the job site. But these traditional contexts for learning and passing down skills are now few and far between in the United States. Again, a bottom line, deadline-driven, low-bid mentality has played a role. This cost-cutting has resulted not only in inferior materials being used and quality craftsmanship being sacrificed, but also in leaving very little to no time for teaching and learning to take place on the job. There have been a number of important steps taken to try and solve this issue, and they're very heartening. There's been the creation of strategic partnerships and the development of innovative new training initiatives. For example, there's the American College of the Building Arts in Charleston, South Carolina, which is a four-year liberal arts college devoted to teaching the building arts. By the way, the impetus for this college came about when Hurricane Hugo hit Charleston and damaged most of the historic buildings there, magnificent historic buildings. And when the people went to restore their homes, there were no craftsmen there to do the work. They had to turn mostly to Europe to find craftspeople. So this galvanized people to do something about this problem. On the federal level, we have the National Park Service. They've partnered with the Department of Education in New York City to create an actual building arts and craftsmanship high school in New York. Our National Trust for Historic Preservation has created the HOPE Crew. It stands for Hands-On Preservation Experience Crew, which pairs young people with experienced craftspeople to teach them preservation skills while helping to rehabilitate historic places. However, even with these important strides taken to foster teaching traditional craft skills, one of the main problems in the United States is that the pathways to training are largely hidden. It's difficult to find out about opportunities to learn a craft. And this brings me to one of the greatest obstacles facing the traditional building crafts in American society, and that is the fact that many people do not view these crafts as having any value or prestige in today's modern world. When building craftspeople go largely unnoticed and are greatly underappreciated in our country. When people think of buildings, new or old, they tend to think of the architect, the designer, or the building itself, but not the craftspeople who transform two-dimensional drawings into three-dimensional works of art through their deep knowledge and understanding of raw materials and tools, as we just heard, their mastery of technique, their striving for excellence. Not only is the important role of the craftsperson in the architectural project rarely recognized, there is in fact a social stigma attached to working in the building trades. As a result, there are few young people interested in learning these skills and pursuing these crafts as a career. And for those who do desire, or who do have the desire and the interest, they are often actively discouraged from following this path by school counselors, parents, and peers. As Master Stonemason Joe Alonzo put it, our society has devalued building trades enough that the notion of a young person pursuing a trade raises eyebrows. This, thus, at the heart is a matter of perceived value and worth, a lack of understanding and appreciation of the importance of these kinds of skills and the valuable contributions that artisans make, not only to the beauty of our built environment, but to the cultural life of our nation. So as a folklorist and curator and filmmaker at the Smithsonian, I thought, well, what is it that we can effectively do from where we sit, which is the National Museum of the United States, to change attitudes and give traditional building craftspeople the recognition and respect they deserve. And what we're well equipped to do at the Smithsonian is actually to provide a national platform for artisans' voices to be heard and for their accomplishments and contributions to be showcased. So I first turned to the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, which reaches hundreds of thousands of visitors to the National Mall every year. And the National Mall is this symbolic ground in Washington that's between the US Capitol and the Washington Monument. It's a very important national place. And in fact, it's interesting, Enrique Pla, who received the Richard Driehaus, a master metal smith from Catalonia, he received the Driehaus Award in Building Arts in 2018. He was a participant in the festival this past summer because we had a program that focused on the artistic and cultural traditions of Catalonia. And that's where I first met him, and then Alejandro. So what I did is I proposed that we present a program at the 2001 festival called Masters of the Building Arts. And it brought to the festival about 150 craftspeople, stone carvers, masons, carpenters, plasterers, adobe craftsmen, and from all over the United States. And they demonstrated their crafts and spoke to the public face-to-face about their trades and their skills over the course of 10 days. And the objectives of this program were to raise awareness of the extraordinary artistry and skill of artisans in the building trades, to highlight the great satisfaction and pride they derive from their work, and to increase understanding of the value and relevance of traditional building craftsmanship to preserving our nation's cultural heritage. I also turned to documentary film as a powerful way to capture in lasting form the voices and values of artisans in the building trades. And I consciously sought to make the type of film, with high production values that could be shown on our public television stations so that it could reach a broad audience. I wanted to reach new audiences so that perhaps if they were to get to know these artisans and their skill and dedication to their work, that they could view them in a new light. So the first film I made was called The Stone Carvers. It was about the Italian-American carvers at the cathedral. And that was in 1984. And much to my surprise, that film actually went on to win an Academy Award for Best Documentary Short Film. And I totally attribute that to the stone carvers and to their affectionate pride and passion for their craft. The second film is an hour-long documentary entitled Good Work, Masters of the Building Arts. And this film has just started screening on public television stations in the United States this past October. So my goal in all these projects has been to provide vehicles for people to meet and hear directly from the craftspeople themselves, to learn about their knowledge and perspectives, about their experiences and values. So what I'd like to do now is just to quickly introduce you to some of the building artisans that I've worked with over the course of many years, who I've featured at the Smithsonian Festival and in my films, and who have greatly influenced and inspired me. This is Joe Alonzo. He's the head mason at Washington Cathedral, in charge of restoring and maintaining the cathedral's 100-year-old monumental stonework. His parents, by the way, immigrated to the US from León, Spain, and where his father was a stonemason. When he first went to work at the cathedral, he was already an accomplished mason, but he told me he had to learn cathedral-style stone setting pretty much from scratch, learning the special set of skills required for building heavy load-bearing masonry walls, crafting Gothic arches, maneuvering huge blocks of stone. The master mason, Billy Cleland, a Scotsman, taught him these skills on the job. What Joe loves is here's the cathedral and the West Towers he was building. What Joe loves is the strong connection with the many generations of masons who worked on the cathedral before him, going all the way back to the early 1900s. In 2011, a major earthquake hit Washington, D.C., causing great damage to the cathedral, especially the central tower. So Joe is now involved in major restoration and earthquake repair work, along with stone carvers Sean Callahan and Andy Ewell. What concerns Joe is that unlike the mid-1980s, when the master masons and journeymen could take the time to teach him the finer aspects of cathedral stone setting, this current job is under tremendous budget and time constraints, and he does not have the time to pass on his skills, breaking a tradition at the cathedral that began in 1907. This is John Canning, a world-class decorative painter who's restored many of our country's most significant buildings. He served a 7-year apprenticeship as a church decorator in Glasgow, Scotland, before immigrating to the United States. And he's passed on his vast accumulated knowledge to his daughter Jackie, who served an apprenticeship with him, as well as many other journeyman craftsmen. And here they are restoring the famous John Lafarge murals at historic Trinity Church in Boston, designed by the architect H.H. Richardson. John Canning likens his restoration work to archaeology, uncovering clues so that he and his team can faithfully execute the work in the manner in which it was originally done. It's like being an archaeologist, he told me, pulling away layers of paint and discovering the original decoration and wonderful craftsmanship of the past, and then trying to replicate that. Here we have Jackie gilding horses for the San Francisco Opera House. And, oops. Oh, there we go. That's the National Building Museum, which in Washington, that dates to the 1890s. But these giant faux marble columns were actually badly restored in the 1960s. And so John Canning went back, he created a window, he went back in time, found the original design, and he reinstated that original design for all 8 of these massive columns. This is Albert Parra. He's an Hispanic adobe craftsman from New Mexico. The arid landscape in this region has given rise to a centuries-old tradition of crafting adobe homes and churches. And Albert's not only an adobe master, he's also a member of the Penitente Brotherhood in Abiquiu. And so for the Masters of the Building Arts film, we documented Albert, and here's the Morada, the chapter house of the Penitente Brotherhood in Abiquiu. And we documented Albert and members of his community doing the annual replastering of this 300-year-old Morada. And it's really a chance every year for the community to come together to preserve this building. And here's the film crew documenting this, but I like this picture because it shows this young boy helping to sift the local dirt. So he's learning. This is Patrick Cardine. He's an Italian-American blacksmith who specializes in designing and crafting hand-forged architectural metalwork. And when I asked Patrick what was the greatest challenge that he faced as a craftsman, he replied, educating the client. And I think that our Stone Carvers spoke of this morning, that I just don't understand really what goes in the materials, the time that it takes, the cost of using excellent materials, and yes, and just the time to do quality work. So they're continually having to educate the client, and this is true for all of the craftspeople that I've worked with. There's Patrick. This is Dieter Goldkuhl. He's a stained glass artisan who worked for more than 40 years at the Washington Cathedral, making and restoring over 100 stained glass windows there. Dieter works collaboratively with artists. He doesn't design his own work. He actually does all of the technical aspects of cutting the glass and assembling and installing the windows. And he likens himself, he says he's a midwife to the window, very much like a builder is to an architect or musicians are to a composer. His beautiful work includes making and installing the magnificent rose window on the west facade of Washington Cathedral. And this is Nick Benson. He's a third-generation stone carver and letterer, the owner and artistic director of the John Stevens Shop, which is a 300-year-old continuously operating stone shop in Newport, Rhode Island. It was founded in 1705. But by the 1920s, the Stevens family had been reduced to mainly doing just sandblasting work, as was the case with most of the people in these trades at that time. And so Nick's grandfather, he bought the Stevens shop from one of the Stevens in 1926, and he revived the art of the hand-carved letter. And so what Nick specializes in is elegantly designed and carved architectural lettering, which he learned from his father at the age of 15. And what excites him most is the ability to combine both the design of the letters with the carving of the letters in a unified and meaningful way, and thus creating successful inscriptions through his keen understanding of materials as well as the process of design. Here he is staining letters. He got the commission to design and carve the letters for the National World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. Here he is at the memorial. He hand-carved those words, Atlantic, there, and all of the inscriptions, along with a small team of carvers. But I will say that what concerns Nick, he just told me, he said in recent years, some architects and designers, they're people who have really just ever known digital design. And they view architecture largely through purely a digital lens. And they've questioned the value of the craft of the hand-carved letter that Nick carries forward. But I think this exquisite alphabet stone that Nick designed and carved speaks to the merits of his work and to the human spirit that's embodied in handcrafted work. And finally, I just would like to end with the Stone Carvers at Washington Cathedral, where it all began for me 40 years ago. This is Frank Zick, Roger Marigi, and Vincent Palumbo, presenting, pretending to be the statues that they carved. But I think this photo says it all. The carvers and all the artisans that I've met and worked with have deep feelings of connection to the art that they're creating, and they have a strong sense of pride and satisfaction in crafting objects of beauty that will last for generations to come. And so I hope what has been gained by the projects that we've undertaken, both the festival program and the documentary films, has been really the social capital of increased prestige and respect, and that we've been able to help promote the traditional building crafts and increase understanding of their importance to preserving our architectural and cultural heritage. Thank you very much.